Okay, I guess still morning. Good morning, everyone. We're going to introduce these, Alan Critchley. He's going to lead us into the next panel. Everything's going to be online, so it'll work out quite well. So without further ado, I'll introduce the British Ugandan Asians at 50 commemoration team. And so, Alan, over to you for the introductory remarks, and we'll hear from the panelists as well. Thank you.
Right. I mean, first of all, huge thanks for inviting us to join in the fantastic conference. I mean, you've had some wonderful speakers, and we are absolutely honoured to follow and to join you. To introduce myself, Alan Critchley, I'm a social worker and magistrate, but for the last year, I've been chairing BUA 50. Mihir, who speaks next, will tell you a bit more about what we've been doing. But I've been chairing BUA 50 because my dad, Tom Critchley, was the director of the Uganda Resettlement Board from 1972 until it closed in February 1974. So just reflecting on what we're doing today, it's wet here. Sorry, being British, we always talk about the weather, of course, but then you do as well because it's been snowing in Canada. It's a wet, cold, grey day. It's dark. And at such times, I always think of those who arrived 50 years ago. Not only had they lost everything, but they'd traded the endless sunshine of the Pearl of Africa for the notorious UK weather in the autumn. And I find it really hard to imagine what that will be like. We'll hear from Chandrika a bit more about what it was like, what it was actually like for her and for the others. So to introduce our panel, after me, it will be Mihir Patel, who is Vice Chair of the India Overseas Trust, and that's a registered charity to further the interests and welfare of the Indian diaspora. Mihir is a lawyer and holds an MBA in international finance. He was born into one of the top 10 industrial families in Uganda, albeit he was actually born in the UK. He has business interests in the Gulf, Sri Lanka, Africa, and the UK. He's been a government advisor and has a particular interest in faith dialogue and multi-faith activities. Mihir will talk about what we've been doing in BUA 50 over the last 18 months. He'll also talk about the previous anniversaries, the 25th and the 40th, and the need for connecting the global Ugandan Asian diaspora over the next 50 years. There's the ambition. So Mihir is joining us from India today. Chandrika Joshi was born in Uganda and left in the Exodus at the age of 14. Her father was a Hindu priest and her mother a homemaker. After spending a short time in the Tonfanau resettlement camp on the Welsh coast, and that's the bit, just imagine going from Uganda to the Welsh coast in the autumn. She and her family were rehoused in the Rhondda in South Wales. She became a dentist, a very distinguished dentist, and specialised in working with people who have vulnerabilities. She also volunteered to work with homeless people and went to Romania to work with orphans. She became a Hindu priest in 2002 and a professional storyteller in 2020. The theme of her talk will be what is home. So each of our speakers will speak for about 15 minutes. That will allow some time for questions and discussions afterwards. And I'm going now to ask Mihir to speak. Mihir.
Good morning, Canada. Not to steal Omar or Shazam's thunder. Greetings to the rest of the world. Assalamu alaikum, Sat Sri Akal, and Namaste from India. I should begin by caveating that I will try to fill the next 15 minutes with distance running as opposed to a sprint, if I may borrow from Rudyard Kipling's poem, If. And secondly, that my loved ones have warned many times that my sincerity often comes across as sarcasm. Alas, this is the result of a pucker Brown Sahib English education, so please bear with me. I would like to start by, on this snowy morning in Canada, saluting our foremothers and forefathers, as a result of whom we are here today commemorating and celebrating this particularly poignant 50th anniversary. I salute them because a little bit of snow, or snow glow of snow, and internet connectivity might have perturbed us, but their journey from India to Africa and then onwards must have been something exceptional that neither snow nor weather nor internet stopped. So I salute them, the pioneers who traveled across the oceans to make their home in Uganda and elsewhere. My second point is a point of correction or note that with regards to certainly the British Ugandan Asians there, and the numbers for the Ugandan Asian community fluctuate between 50,000 up to 80,000, depending on whose numbers you're looking at. But I would like to point out, Shazan and I have been scratching our heads and doing some reverse mathematics and thinking, well, if there were 28,604 that came through the resettlement and reception camps in the UK, and various other thousands, 6,000 or so went through Canada, where did the rest of these 60 to 80,000 people go? I would like to mention that, like my family, there were very many, how to put it, economic migrants of choice rather than force. So the migration that is generally talked about as the precursor were the indentured labor that was sent to East Africa from India, and predominantly from the states of Gujarat and Punjab to build the railways. But with them were migrant, economic migrants of choice, like my grandfather, who went as pioneers and who also weren't counted really in the statistics in terms of the camps, because they never went through the camps. So a lot of British Ugandan Asians, and also I know in the Canadian diaspora, people had arrived way before the expulsion was announced, and had already had two homes, or were maintaining multiple homes. In terms of my grandfather, it was a backup and a security plan just in case things did go pear-shaped in Uganda from 71 onwards. And I salute again his foresight that he made provision and that we are where we are now. So those are the few points that I'd like to start with. I wanted to introduce the India Overseas Trust. The India Overseas Trust is a UK registered charity founded in 2002, and our chairman, Mr. Praful R. Patel, a very distinguished social worker, party member, and had the singular distinction of being the only Asian member of the British government's Uganda Resettlement Board, and is now the only surviving member of the Uganda Resettlement Board. He is the chairman of the India Overseas Trust and set it up in 2002 to deal with, as Alan said, issues arising from and with regards to the Indian diaspora, both in the United Kingdom and globally. He is the inspiration behind our National Lottery Heritage Fund project and BUA at 50. And the genesis of these anniversaries in terms of commemorations and celebrations, I must acknowledge and remember the late Mr. Manubai Muljabai Madhavani, scion and head of the Madhavani group. No self-respecting East African Asian would deny knowing the Madhavani family, the greatest industrial family of their age, of the period, who did so much. And the late Manubai, as head of the family, spent some time in jail under Amin, and then was eventually able to come to London. But the 25th anniversary and anniversary commemorations were very much his inspiration, his hard work, also his financing. And the 25th was very much a result of his persistence, which culminated in a wonderful multi-faith service of Thanksgiving at Westminster Abbey, which will be famous world over for not only Her Majesty the late Queen's funeral, but also royal occasions such as the royal weddings. So it was a great coup for the late Manubai and other members of his team, in particular now Lord Jitesh Gadhia of Northwood, who was instrumental in the 25th anniversary service of Thanksgiving. And it was at the time, for us, we viewed it as a service of thanksgiving for us to give thanks to the British people. And we were honoured to have Sir Edward Heath, then Prime Minister during the 1972 crisis, to give a reading at the 25th anniversary. And again, tribute to Lord Gadhia at the time, who pursued him relentlessly in true British Ugandan Asian form and persuaded him not to get on a plane to New York for a speaking engagement, but to come to Westminster Abbey and to do a reading. So I wanted to acknowledge these two people, Mr. Praful Patel and the late Mr. Manubai Madhavani, and that's the genesis really of the commemorations. The India Overseas Trust was handed the mantle after Manubai Madhavani passed away in 2011 to spearhead the 40th anniversary in the UK, and we followed strongly in his path with two things that were of particular note. One was a service of thanksgiving at Leicester Cathedral, Leicester being a city in the United Kingdom, which for the Exodus and Exodes has special meaning because the then City Council of Leicester put in full-page ads in the Uganda Argus, etc., saying, "Do not come to Leicester, though you might be under the understanding that it's a great place. It is, but we are already overwhelmed, so do not come to Leicester." And of course, in true Asian fashion, that meant that the highest concentration of British Ugandan Asians still is, I believe, 1 in 5 in the city of Leicester. So we had a service of thanksgiving at Leicester, and we changed the narrative slightly from not only thanking the host government and the host community, but also it was wonderful to have the then Secretary of State for Community, now Lord Eric Pickles, thank the British Ugandan Asian and their contribution to British society. That was the first time that I had heard that. And we acknowledge Lord Pickles and the British government for saying that the first time at the 40th anniversary. And we find ourselves now 10 years later. Time has travelled fast at the 50th anniversary, the commemorations. The India Overseas Trust very much inspired by the Gujarati or the Ugandan Asian philosophy of money is valuable, and if we're getting money from the government, we must take it. For 4 or 5 years, hats off to Alan and our project coordinator, Warwick, Mr. Warwick Hawkins, MBE, who pursued the UK National Lottery Heritage Fund, and we were successful in getting a grant of almost £100,000 to record specifically the oral histories of the volunteers who helped at the resettlement camps. There were 16 of them set up, and the full-time director of that, as Alan said, was his late father, Thomas Critchley, who was seconded from the Home Office as permanent secretary to run the Uganda Resettlement Board on a full-time basis. And they did amazing work in the matter of 6 weeks of setting the board up and receiving the first evacuees on September the 18th in 1972 at Stansted Airport, completed their mission with 16 camps, which ranged from Ton Vanau, a former army camp in Wales, right the way to a holding house, essentially, in the salubrious London, central London area of Kensington. There were 16 camps. They did their job. 28,604 plus 2 births that we have found went through these camps. And as Alan said, by January 1974, they wrapped up their work at a cost of £6 million to Her Majesty's government and the British taxpayer. And as was commented at the House of Lords debate on the 26th of October, mooted by Lord Dollar Poppet of Harrow, who is himself a British Ugandan Asian. This was possibly the best £6 million invested by the British government and the British taxpayer that has paid royal dividends in terms of the economic benefit of the British Ugandan Asian community to the UK economy. Anyways, our project has been focused on the volunteers. The amazing thing is that after 50 years, with hindsight, the Ugandan Resettlement Board and their model is actually still very relevant in terms of immigration. We have pointed this out to the current British government, and it has been acknowledged at the highest level, both in terms of the floor of the Houses of Parliament and in government, that it is relevant to the Ukrainian situation and the Afghan and Syrian situation, where people were integrated in a particular fashion. Yes, mistakes were made, but by and large, the work of the Uganda Resettlement Board really is a model that does deserve to be studied in further detail and commended and looked at for the important learning exercises for current and future migration. I want to move on now to talk about the importance of recording these oral histories. We were honoured to co-host with the School of Oriental and African Studies, the South Asian Institute, at the prestigious Brunei Gallery in June, an event called Narratives of Refugee Memories and Resettlement. The key academics who spoke there was organised by Dr. Chandrika, who is the director of the South Asian Institute. And in particular, I would like to draw to attention the work of Dr. Aditi Kumar of JNU and Warwick University. And her area of speciality is the recording of oral histories and narratives. And one thing which particularly struck me was her comment that one of the lessons learned, this is of course also the 75th anniversary of the partition of India. And one of the lessons that has been learned is that at 75, the first-hand survivors are few and far between and are significantly advanced in age. As a result, their memories are diluted in an academic sense, and therefore this 50-year point is really very critical, that we need to collect these first-hand oral histories whilst these people are alive and have the direct first-hand memory. And this is very much a part of our work, and it is critically important. I would like to acknowledge Carleton University's and the Uganda Library Collections work in that. And specifically one of the sessions that has come before us in the last 2 days, the role of women. The role of women really cannot be underestimated in any migration, but certainly in terms of any migration with regards to the Asian community and the Ugandan diaspora. Moving on rapidly, there are many things to say about the community, about integration, about commemorating, and now at 50 years celebrating. We were very fortunate to be hosted by His Majesty King Charles III at Buckingham Palace on the 2nd November at an event which was a celebration as well as a commemoration. But I do want to note that integration is key. The successes of the community as well as the failures are key. We need to document this. There are so very many people that I wanted to talk about, but time forbids me from mentioning all of their names. But various British Ugandan Asian brands that are household names the world over. Yardley of London, once owned by the Chaitanya family. Jean Patel perfume, owned by Yogesh Mehta and family. Tilda Rice, I hope you all eat curry and you've all tried Tilda Rice. And various others, Jordan Oates, etc. But British Ugandan Asians and the diaspora have not only excelled in terms of business, but in the worlds of academia, notably the Maney brothers in the United Kingdom, a gentleman called Munir Pir Mohammed, who is current chair of the National Health Service Pharmacogenetics Committee, Professor Avtar Bra, who is the leading expert in diaspora studies at Birkbeck College, and I cannot fail in this long list but to mention Her Excellency Nimisha Jayant Madhwani, who is serendipitously just been presented her credentials as the current High Commissioner of the Republic of Uganda to the Court of St James's in the UK. As I said, the list goes on. Please do look at our website, www.bua50.org. It is not an exhaustive or complete list, but you will find in our 50 patrons many of these Ugandan Asians from around the world, and also on our steering group. And we are proud to have them associated with us. So moving on from that, we've been working on a touring exhibition as well as various events, a panel discussion, which is coming up very soon at the UK National Archive on the 26th of November. And we're honoured to have Shazan flying in courtesy of Pelton University to speak. I would just like to end by saying it is critically important that we as a global diaspora connect now, spread our wings, recall this information, learn from our mistakes, and chalk out a path for the next 50 years. In closing, as I think I've already overrun, but I would like specifically to thank Heather, who is one of the two conference coordinators for this conference. My personal thanks to Dr. Shazan Mohammadi, who I would now like to consider a friend and who I would very much hope to see at the forefront of diaspora, specifically East African and Uganda migration academia in the next 50 years to come. He has the wit, the charm, and the intelligence and the young age to be able to sustain the next 50 years. Another person that I must mention is my dear friend now, Mr. Salim Fakirani, the Fakirani family being one of the founding donors of the Uganda collection. And he was recently honored a member of the Justice Department in the state of Ottawa, or in Ottawa or Ontario, but has been appointed onto the Police Services Board. And lastly, somebody who came to speak to us, and again, he is really the leading example of what I mean by we need to record this first-hand oral history. His Excellency, former Ambassador, Adjunct Professor, Professor Mike Malloy, who was Vincent Sinclair's deputy on the ground in Kampala. His talk to us at SOAS, and many of you will be familiar with his work and his involvement in this conference, was amazing. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank everybody present today. Thank you so much for hosting us. Namaste.
Thank you, Mihir. I'm hoping at some point we can put our website on the screen so people can find it, because it really is a fantastic resource. Although I say it myself, we've now got a lot of the oral histories on there. We've got the history of what happened. So, I mean, it really is a good resource. Thank you, Mihir. And Chandrika, I know you're going to start in your own way, but at some point, do tell us what it was like for a 14-year-old. But over to you, Chandrika.
In 1930s, my father, who had been an orphan as a child, left India. He was a trained priest. He climbed on a dhow at Porbandar and headed towards Mombasa. Although he had been trained as a priest, he did not want to work as a priest at that particular time. He could see that all these businessmen were making so much money and were prosperous. He didn't want to be a poor priest. So he came to Iganga and joined his brother and did these apprenticeships, which people in those days did, by helping around in shops and in businesses and learning the language. At the end of 9 years of working, My father had less than 1,000 rupees in his pocket. He went back to India, met my mother, and married her. And in 1946, they returned back to Uganda. My mother was my father's Lakshmi. My father, after marriage, prospered. He prospered because he was a charismatic priest. He was philosophical more than ritualistic. And whilst performing a religious service, he was noted. And then the work never stopped. He covered the Busoga district and was a priest in towns like Bugiri, Saroti, Kakira, Lugazi, Kamuli, Jinja, Namtemwa, so many villages and towns where he was well thought of. When we left Uganda, my father was in his 50s. In his time in Uganda, my father and mother had only been back to India twice. All of us were born in Uganda. So in 1972, when we left Uganda and came to Tonvanai, it was a culture shock. We came at night after a long journey. It was cold. We were given a little hut to live in with a little heater, a small heater. And the next day when we woke up, because it wasn't dark, we realized it was gray. And in reality, it was gray every single day after that. So that's the way it seemed. In 1973, we were housed in the Rhondda valleys. And my headmaster at the school, who was giving me extra English lessons, corrected an essay, and he replaced the word house by home. This is your home, not your house, he had said to me. And then he asked me, what is home in your mother tongue? Ghar, I said. Okay, so what is house? Ghar, I said. He smiled. He said, you know, in English, house is a building. Home is where you belong. Those words stayed with me and have stayed with me throughout my life here. In Uganda, I lived in a place called Iganga. I belong to a community of 40 to 50 families. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, predominantly Gujaratis. Like I said, my father was a Hindu priest, well known in Busoga, and my mum was a homemaker. My mum taught us to read and write Gujarati before we had even started school. She told us stories. She was a great storyteller, like her mother was before her. And she told us stories of families. She told us of mythologies. She told us stories which were fables. And most of the stories where the woman was a protagonist. When I think of Uganda, I think of that semi-permanent 1920s house with corrugated iron roof, which thundered when it rained. I think of the mango trees outside the veranda. I think of the hills behind which the sun would set. I think of the family shrine and the smell of incense. I think of that big bookshelf which housed all of my father's books, old and ancient like earth. I think of the cement floor which felt like stone. I think of the earthen pots which were full of water. I think of the jaconi with the coal sagri where my mother made rotis. And I think of that courtyard at the back of the house where we would sit and look at the sky and count the stars and listen to the stories that my mother's told. When I relive that feeling, I get a sense of belonging, a place where I knew who I was, a place which was secure, a place which had boundaries, a place where my parents led and we followed. By the time the headmaster had told me the difference between home and house, what he didn't know is that I already had the pangs of Hiraeth. Hiraeth is a Welsh word. It means a deep loss of a home. And that pain was already within me, and I no longer knew who I was. I no longer felt a sense of belonging. Being the only Gujarati Hindu girl in my class, I was lost. I had two choices, I told myself, around the age of 15. Either I become submissive and not mention my culture, or I become defensive. And I decided to become defensive. I thought I was the voice of my culture. I was the voice of Hinduism. I was the voice of Indian, what being Indian was. So if there was a debate in the class of arranged marriage, I would be on the side of arranged marriage. My home life had totally changed. My father, rendered physically disabled from a previous stroke, struggled. My mother, having had a nervous breakdown in the resettlement camp, had shriveled and withdrawn. Like Lord of the Flies, the children took over, creating a hierarchy, keeping an eye on each other, leading and following at the same time. It was a difficult time. It is when I went to university in Cardiff that I met other Indian students of my age group. Since I had left Uganda in 72, I had not encountered people like me and talked about their journeys and learned from them. When I attended yesterday's talk, it made me smile as it was discussed, who are we? Are we Indians? Are we Africans? So at university, it made me smile because at university, that was our regular debate. The East African Asians students, we talked about identity all the time. Who was Indian and who was not? Are we Africans? Are we Welsh? Are we British? But university was a busy time. A dental degree and a medical degree are full on. So I had very little time to reflect. I just went along with my studies. It is when I qualified, after having done 1 year of house jobs, I knew I had to go and search for a home because I did not belong. I wanted to go to a land where I belong. So I took time off and I went to India. And then I went to Zimbabwe in Africa. I was too scared to go to Uganda. After visiting the two countries, I realized that life had moved on and I no longer belonged there either. Sitting in a hotel outside Victoria Park, with tears in my eyes, writing in my diary, I wrote, I have to accept that the whole world is my home. I have to tell myself there are no boundaries, they are man-made. I have to tell myself, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the whole world is my family. With that, I returned back to Wales. I had decided at that stage that I was going to work with disabled people and people who are vulnerable. So I left Wales, moved to London, and my life was incredibly busy with working and with postgraduate education. But I lived like a hermit. I lived frugally in temporary accommodation. I often had comments. I was a senior dentist by that stage in a hospital, in a community, and people often commented why I'm living the way I am. Because I did not want to own anything. Because I did not want to settle. I did not want to call anything home. I was comfortable in a temporary setting. During those days, I came to know who I was. I found solace in my religion, where I saw myself as the Atma, the soul. I told myself Atma is gender-free, does not have a gender. I told myself Atma is everything and everywhere, and that's what I truly am. I moved to Bristol and started working in a hospital in Bristol, still living in temporary accommodation, but a slightly better flat. I still didn't own anything. At this stage, I was in my 40s. And that's when I had a major meltdown. I took time out, I took sabbatical. I found a therapist and I addressed belonging. I addressed what is home for me, what is belonging. That was a really useful time. And I concluded two things: that I no longer wanted to work full-time as a dentist. I just wanted to go into the area of arts. And I was going to move back to Wales because Wales was going to be the closest that I can come to home. During that time, I trained and learned a lot about Hinduism. and I conducted my first Hindu wedding. I was a bit worried. My family was worried that as a female, I will not be accepted. But life had moved on. I was welcomed by all the people. My father knew that they were so glad that I had taken on this step. In 2004, I returned back to Wales without a job. And I walked around the streets of Cardiff, and when I saw the hills, I told myself, these are the hills I saw as a child. I looked at the sky and told myself, this is the sky I saw as a child. That year, my father died. We decided as a family to scatter my father's ashes in a Welsh river. We gathered around a place known as Stepping Stones. Symbolic. It has stones which go from one bank of the river to the second bank. It is a picturesque place where the river joins, where Ogmore River joins the sea. We gathered there, we recited Sanskrit chants, we had Ganga water which we poured in the river, and we created our own sacred place. Now our children consider that place as a place of pilgrimage. They visit that river because they know that river is sacred. Recently, like I said, I became a storyteller. I have started writing now. I would like to thank British Ugandan Asians 50 for giving me an opportunity to talk about my life. Until now, I had never wanted to go back to Uganda because I did not want that romantic image that I have of my childhood to dissolve. But I would like to go back to Uganda now. I would like to go back to find those few African people I knew to learn about their lives. What was it like for them in the last 50 years? Thank you.
Chandrika, thank you. That was so powerful. Huge thanks. I'm sure it was, I have a sense it's difficult when you're doing it virtually, but I think that was probably you can't hear a pin drop moment in the conference. So thank you. That was very powerful. And may I just share one story about you, with or without your permission? Mihir mentioned that we were at Buckingham Palace on the 2nd of November. I think he may have mentioned that more than once. But one of the things that happened there was that Chandrika was on stage in front of the king with Jane Priest, who was one of our volunteers, who was a volunteer at the time in 1972. And on behalf of the Ugandan Asians who came over, Chandrika gave Jane a shawl, which he placed around Jane on stage in front of the king and so many others there. As a way of saying thank you to the volunteers. So, that was a wonderful symbolic moment. And it feels like Buckingham Palace is your home as well, Chandrika, now. But thank you. I think we've probably got about 5 minutes left. Shazan, I'm going to look to you wherever you are. I don't know whether it's going to be possible to use that last 5 minutes for any questions or comments.
Yeah, let's take a round of questions, and then we'll try and give all the folks maybe about a minute or two to comment on what they hear. So if there are questions, please come forward. Yeah, go ahead, Omi.
Thank you to all the presenters. And I know people hate the slide. It's more of a comment than a question. But I just wanted to thank Chandrika, especially for being, like, that was a very vulnerable story. And I think that, you know, this conference built around an archive is really beautiful to have you as the last speaker for the morning. So thank you very much.
Can I just say, do have a look at our website, because Chandrika is on there, and there are many other stories as well. So please do have a look at the oral histories on the website.
We do have more questions. Yeah, Samuel, please go ahead. Yeah.
I want to tell you that after finishing my senior six, I went to study to be a teacher at Kariro National Teachers College. And Kariro is in Uganda, was subdivided from Uganda as a district. So I feel connected because I studied in Kariro for 2 years. And there was this bias of the Busoga about the language. You know, we have the Buganda. There's a way, there's some bit of pride, and we suddenly see the Basoga as slow in the development. So, I mean, but I want to say to you that your presence, the Indian occupancy in the Busoga land made it boom. And to date, the relationship is still there. We've just had a visit of the Chabazinga of Busoga coming to visit Canada, visit important dignitaries, including the Aga Khan Foundation. And that sense of connection and reconnection really matters, and really, you are celebrated, you are seen, you, and you are heard, and we love you. On behalf of the Basoga who are not here, I really want to say that we love you so much.
Thank you, that's lovely.
And
I
Alan,
just
I'll just
wanted
give
to
you
add
an opportunity
to that.
if you want to. Yeah, go ahead, Mihir.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add to what that gentleman said is that two things that have been said very often over the last year in the UK. One is that Uganda's loss, Britain's gain.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that Lord Puppet said at the House of Lords is that most of us were born in Uganda, but we were made in Britain. And I'm sure you all share that sentiment. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mihir. Alan, did you want to give any last closing remarks for the panel, or?
I think I would just like to say, I mean, a real thank you. I mean, a thank you to everyone who's joined us on the panel, and to the audience in Canada, and thank you again for inviting us. And I think one of the important things to say at the 50th anniversary is that we don't want people to forget this story. We don't want, and we want to pass it on to future generations. One of the things that I've found as I've been talking to people about what I've been doing over the last year or so is that people don't know about it in the UK. I'm not sure if that's the same in Canada, but I think it's just such an important story where the UK didn't get everything right, but it got some things right. And it welcomed a group of expellees who have made a fantastic contribution to this country. And I think that is something that I do want passed on. And I hope that there'll be a few legacy strands from our project, but I think that message about people coming from a different culture and enriching the UK is the message to pass on for future generations.
Wonderful. And I guess on behalf of everyone that's here, thank you all for participating in this. I know we've been thinking it through over the last few months, and really appreciate all of your time, especially spanning across the time differences. And we do apologize for the timing today. I know it was a bit of a challenge. We did have our first snowfall, so it wasn't too bad. It was 5 centimeters. We're used to much
Jealous
worse.
of that.
Exactly, but the first one's always the worst. So thank you all so much for your time, and we really, really appreciate it. And we'll, of course, keep in touch.
Thank you.
And so I'll just offer some quick closing remarks for our online audience. So for all of the folks that are joining online right now, we've emailed you all sort of a self-directed workshop handbook to help guide you through the 2 events that are going to happen this afternoon. For folks that are here in this room, I do really want to thank all of you, especially those that have traveled from across the country to be here physically. It is noted, and we do really appreciate it. I know this is a significant milestone for the community, and many of you are here probably representing your families and communities as well. And so we do really, really appreciate that. I do also want to just do some super quick housekeeping. We'll head into lunch. I'll just ask when you leave the room if you can clear your chair. We're going to rearrange the room for the workshop, so we'll just move things around. There'll be some chart paper and things like that set up. What else is there? Yeah, and I guess since we're doing the online closing, I'll just offer, a sincere thank you, on behalf of Carleton University, our conference committee, our advisory committee, partners, and the numerous donors. We do want to extend our gratitude for all of you joining us online. And we truly hope that this conference has all provided you with an opportunity to reflect and rethink about the 50th anniversary. And so we do encourage all of you to continue to share these incredible stories and to recapture this and rethink what this expulsion, what the resettlement, what the global impacts of this movement have been. So thank you all very much, and bon appetit.